So I wanted to welcome all of you to the Stress and Anxiety Management Beyond Meds talk that I love to give. This is one of my favorite topics. And the reason why it's a favorite topic is because it's not just about stress and anxiety management beyond meds. This is what I'm going to share with all of you today is really a way in which you can start living your life, even if you don't have overt stressors or overt anxiety. But when you start living your life in this way with the tools I'm about to share, everything starts changing. Your resilience starts going up, your ability to live better and feel better starts going up. So I'm super excited about this topic. I call it Stress and Anxiety Management Beyond Meds because it needs a name, but it is a lot more than just that. Okay, so before we dive into everything, I wanted to introduce myself. I am Dr. Purna Menon. I am a licensed naturopathic doctor in the state of Washington in the US. And in Singapore, I operate as your health consultant. But my background is basically that I went to 4 years in medical school. I have training in a host of, conditions and illnesses, a little bit like your GP, but my approach to all of health is very holistic because naturopathic medicine is very holistic. We're looking at treating the root cause, and we're also looking at activating your ability to heal yourself. So with a lot of my mental health work and with my mind-body work, I'm really engaging with your own vitality and your own nature and ability to be able to self-regulate and self-heal. And that is a powerful skill. And it's one that I'm very passionate about and which I want to encourage all of you to think about and step into as well. Other things that I'm trained in, I'm a herbalist, a nutritionist, a homeopath, since naturopathic medicine involves a lot of modalities and tools. All of those sort of fall under the umbrella of things that I'm trained in. I also do craniosacral, and in particular, and specifically to today's talk, I do a lot of mental health work and mind-body medicine. So feeling anxious is a normal part of being human. It's one we cannot avoid. But in spite of this, it is an encounter we can develop mastery over. Mastery over stress and anxiety is both a practice and a journey. And this is really the point, one of the big points to think about, which is that it's not just, oh, I'm a human, there are going to be anxiety provoking situations and stresses in my life, I'll just have to get through them. This is not just about getting through life. This is about going through life in a way that you feel masterful, that you feel like you have control and ability, and you're not just putting out fires, but you're able to face them and thrive. And this is not just special to one or two individuals. This ability to have mastery in your life, it's innate in every single one of us. And that is a powerful, powerful concept, which I want to invite all of you all to think about today and to start practicing from here on. That inside of you, at the core of your being, you are a masterful, resilient human. And as you discover your own journey and your own practices, I want to invite you to step into what that mastery and what that resilience means and looks like for you. And we are going to dive into some of that today. Okay, so as I said, feeling anxious and stressed is part of life. But what is your relationship to your anxiety and your stressors? And this is a very key question, because it's oftentimes how are we relating to things in our life rather than the thing itself? Because things are going to come and go, stresses are going to come and go, difficult, challenging situations will come and go. But how are you relating to all of them? And to invite you into thinking about how you're relating, I want you to look at this image on the right side of my screen. Someone is holding here some sand in their palm. And this is a metaphor I like to use with many of my clients because it speaks to that notion of how are we relating to anxiety and stress. So if you're trying to hold sand in your palm, if you clench it, if you grip it tight, what happens? That sand will fall through your fingers. You will not be able to hold it in the palm of your hand. But if you hold it like how this individual is holding it, open yet firm, steady and yet stable, then the sand stays in your palm. And this is the way that I want you to think about how you're relating to your anxiety and your stresses. Are you gripping them so tight? Are you trying to over control them? Are you smothering the life out of them? Is the sand trickling through your fingers? Or are you able to gently hold those stressors in the palm of your hand with stability, with openness, in such a way that it's held and it's not falling through and not crumbling apart? This is a very important concept. How is it that you're relating to anything versus the thing itself? Because the thing itself is a neutral external event. Those things are going to happen. But it's your internal equation with those things, how you're relating, that defines everything and defines the nature of your life. So keep that thought in mind. Make a note about that if you feel it's relevant. And from there, we shall carry on. First question to think about. How do you know you are anxious or stressed? What changed? This is a question I often ask my clients who come to me for mental health conditions or mind-body medicine or in general. How do you know you're anxious or you're stressed? Because oftentimes we might be telling other people, oh, I'm so stressed, or telling ourselves, I'm feeling anxious. But the reason that thought has come into your mind is because something has changed in your mind or in your body. And I'm going to invite you from today to start thinking about yourself as a detective into gently finding out, into gently piecing apart what has changed. Because we don't randomly say, I'm feeling anxious or stressed. We say it because something has changed in our mind or our body. And when you're able to look at yourself through this lens of what has changed, what has shifted, that really starts giving you a lot of data around what is going on with me as a human. How am I orienting? How am I moving through my world and my life? Such that I am now saying to myself or to other people, I'm anxious or I'm stressed. So the next slide is going to help you to think about this a little more in more clear terms. Because I'm going to talk about some common anxiety symptoms or some common stress symptoms. So let's go through them one by one. And as I go through them, you can gently reflect on whether this is something you have experienced. Sometimes it might be because of anxiety or a stressor, and sometimes it might be because of some other sort of pathology that's going on. But some very common anxiety symptoms are your heart rate going up or experiencing palpitations, shallow or irregular breathing, meaning a change in your breathing. Sweating is a big stress response, and you might find that it's not just in, it's not just in sort of standard parts of your body. It might be in your palms, it might be in the soles of your feet, it might be on your face. Having tight muscles. Now, tight muscles is almost a subconscious response. Clenching and gripping, and I'll talk about this in a future slide as well, but those responses happen below the level of your consciousness a lot of the time, meaning when you're stressed or when you're anxious, you start clenching and gripping without even realizing you're doing these things. Similarly to breathing, you might even not realize that you're holding your breath or your breathing has changed, but that automatically seems to come on when you're anxious or when you're stressed. Other anxiety symptoms are chest pain, stomach pain, incontinence or the urgency to use the bathroom sometimes, insomnia, headaches, negative thoughts or images. So when you're stressed or when you're anxious, you just find that you're having negative self-talk about the situation or yourself. You might also just find prolonged moods such as anger or sadness coming into your life or in that moment. There might be a tendency for hypervigilance or perfectionism, the need to do things a certain way and perfectly in your mind. And there might even be something called dissociation or mentally just going blank. So you might have noticed how many physical symptoms there were. I'm just going to go back for a second and just scan through this list and notice how many physical symptoms there are. So we often think about anxiety and stresses as a mental process, but what's happening is that it's a bodily response. And this bodily response is very important to take note of. It's another key point that I want you all to really absorb today, that stress and anxiety manifest through your body, in addition to being in your mind or in your psychology as well. It is not a cognitive or rational process, because if you're being logical and rational about many stresses or anxiety situations, you might not even feel the anxiety or stress. But what's happening is that your response to anxiety and stress is psychophysiological. It is in your body and it is in your psychology. So take a few moments now to reflect on whether you have any of these symptoms. And as you do that, I'm going to really invite you to do that with absolute gentleness, with curiosity, and no judgment whatsoever. Because this is how you begin to build healthy self-awareness. And healthy self-awareness is the foundation of all of this mind-body work that I do with stress management and anxiety management beyond the use of meds. And this is a powerful tool because no one else is giving it to you. You are giving it to yourself. But it's very important with self-awareness to pair it with these three things: gentleness, curiosity, and no judgment. So what might help you in adopting this stance towards yourself is imagining that you are a curious detective. You're simply just observing what's showing up in your life. Oh, I'm feeling stressed. What's happening in my body? I see I'm starting to sweat a little bit. My muscles have become a little tight. Oh, I notice now my breathing is changing. You know, as you're doing this, you're not judging yourself for doing that. And I'll go into the no judgment a little bit more in a few slides down. And you're doing it gently. You're not doing it in a way that's activated and making you more stressed. You're simply just observing and just witnessing. And this sort of approach to self-awareness is very powerful because you're not putting yourself down. You are seeing with great clarity who you are and how you move through this world. And when you start seeing yourself through such a lens of clarity, of gentleness, of curiosity, you start getting very powerful data around who you are, around how you respond to stress and stressors. And so this is my first takeaway to all of you: developing gentle self-awareness. Because if you do not have gentle self-awareness, you are either judging yourself too harshly, you're really going into introspection, but you're doing it in a way that is taking away from who you are, from your self-worth. But if you practice self-awareness in a way that is gentle, curious, and without judgment, you are becoming empowered. You are really understanding who you are, and that will help you to navigate your world with mastery and with resilience. And it's a practice because we oftentimes are our worst critics. We oftentimes want to judge ourselves the most, you know. So many of us are very guilty of feeling we messed up something and then being harsh on ourselves. But what I'm here to invite you to think about is that it's not the harshness on yourself that you need. Let that go. Think about the sand in your palm. You want to just hold your self-awareness so gently that it brings you insight into who you are without judgment. So this is the first and important takeaway, because if you are not self-aware, you are simply moving through life blindly. It is your self-awareness that gives you the ability to then do anything, to then make a change, to then want to be in a different way, or to continue to be the way that you are. If you are not self-aware, you will not be able to do any of these things. So self-awareness is the first important skill to develop for yourselves. Moving on. So as I mentioned, stress is psychophysiological. It is your nervous system responding to your internal or external environment. So going back to that slide that I'd shared, if you remember, many of those symptoms are physical or physiological. As I explained to you, stress manifests through your body and through your psychology. It's not a logical or a rational process, but it is psychophysiological. And it is your nervous system responding to your internal or external environment. And the reason I'm bringing in your nervous system to this entire talk is because it's a very important way of building self-awareness and understanding yourself. So what is your nervous system? That might sound a little bit scientific, and those of you who haven't studied biology or who aren't, sort of scientific minded, I'm going to instead invite you to think about the fight or flight versus the rest and digest response. Because these are words or phrases that you might have heard, which are really just descriptions of your nervous system. Fight or flight is on one side, and the sort of opposite of that is your rest and digest response. So fight or flight is a very important and standard stress response activated through your body's nervous system when you are stressed or anxious. And it is absolutely critical for surviving. If we didn't have our fight or flight response, we would not have survived. Thinking about how long humans have existed as a species, for 300,000 years we have existed. If we didn't have our fight or flight response, we would not have known how to keep our species alive. In the face of stressors and danger and threat, if we didn't have this response, our body would have been completely susceptible and vulnerable to succumbing to that stress or that threat. So this stress response, this fight or flight response, is absolutely required. And the issue, however, and I'm going to talk more about that in the slides to come, is that these days we might be going into fight or flight a little bit more often than is actually required. So the fight or flight response is to help us to orient to stressors and danger and threat. It's to help us to feel safe and to stay alive. But how often is it being activated in our lives today? How often are we actually launching into the stress response? So in case there is anyone scientific minded, or there are participants who are not joining us today who might go back and listen to this talk, I want to talk about the science for just a few moments. So look at the left-hand side of your screen. Stress response, involuntary reflexive, as I explained. It is something your nervous system launches, and it's involuntary and it's reflexive because you need it in order to stay alive. So what happens is that certain things start getting processed in your brain and in your hypothalamus, which is a part of your brain. Hormones start getting released. CRH is a hormone, for example. Those hormones feed to different parts of your brain, the anterior pituitary, which then releases more hormones, which then goes and feeds into other parts of your body. For example, the adrenal cortex and the adrenal medulla are parts of your kidney, which also produce very important hormones. So on the left-hand side, when your stress response is activated, your kidney starts releasing things like cortisol, norepinephrine and epinephrine, or adrenaline and noradrenaline. Those might be hormones you're more familiar with the terminology for. And then what happens? Your body responds. Your oxygen consumption goes up. That's why you might be trying to breathe faster, which increases metabolism. Your blood pressure might go up. Your heart rate might go up. Why? Because your body feels it's under threat. If your blood pressure and heart rate do not go up, the organs that are needed in order for you to stay alive do not have the resources that you need. So this response that your body launches into is absolutely essential in order to be able to deal with a stressor. The opposite of that is the rest and digest response. Again, a nervous system response. If you're familiar with sort of biological terminology, fight or flight is what's called the sympathetic branch of the nervous system, whereas rest and digest is the parasympathetic branch of your nervous system. The rest and digest response requires conscious elicitation and repeated practice. So unlike the stress response, which is involuntary and reflexive, which we need in order to stay alive, so that's a good thing, the relaxation response requires conscious elicitation and repeated practice. So now going back to my thing about self-awareness, if you're not self-aware that you are now stressed and things are activating, you will not be able to consciously relax either, because relaxation requires consciousness and it requires practice. And if you're not aware around that, if you're not aware around being stressed, and if you're not aware around how to relax, you can't activate that. So the issue these days is that oftentimes we are in this involuntary reflexive stress response a little bit more than we need to, and we're not consciously creating or practicing that relaxation response, which is the opposite of the fight or flight, which is also activated through our nervous system. And as you can see on the right-hand side of the screen, everything that gets activated in the stress response starts to come back into balance and regulate through the relaxation response. The relaxation response is how you bring yourself out of fight or flight into a state of balance, self-regulation, and safety. So moving on, I want to ask you all, what is driving this nervous system response? I've already said it a few times, but I really want to kind of drill this point in, because it's a very important way of how you understand yourself and how you build self-awareness. So what is driving this nervous system response is safety and threat. So going back to that evolutionary story that I said, for 300,000 years, we've existed as a species. We were picking up on danger cues in our environment. And that might have looked like things like predator attacking us, famine, natural disaster. You know, these were really critical things that when we encountered as a developing human thousands of years ago, our body needed to launch this fight or flight response. But because we are wired that way biologically, our body is doing the same exact thing today. It is surveying our environment, picking up on unsafety cues, picking up on threatening cues, launching the very same fight or flight response. But what has changed today? What's changed today is that the cues that you're picking up on have changed. And especially for those of us in Singapore, a relatively safe climate with a very, moderate temperature range. Some of you may argue around that since it's being very hot these days, but still quite contained compared to other countries that go through seasons. Relatively safe. Also, we live in a city, so our basic needs are oftentimes well taken care of. We have access to drinking water, we have electricity, we have a roof over our head, we have access to resources such as food, such as a judicial system, such as policemen to keep us safe. And yet, if I were to ask you all, do you not feel stressed and anxious? All of you will tell me yes. So that means that still our body is surveying something in our environment and picking up on the sense of feeling unsafe and threatened. So what is going on here? I want to invite you all now to think about what makes me feel unsafe. And what I've put on the slide here are just a few sort of very standard, maybe urbanized stresses and triggers. It could be many more things than just this. But these are good guidelines for you to start thinking about. And this is a very important way of understanding yourself, building self-awareness through the lens of asking yourself, what makes me feel unsafe? When you survey the environment, what are the cues? What are the danger cues your body is picking up on? So for example, it could be relational conflict. It could be marital conflict. If you work in a company or with other people, when you run into disagreements with them, there's conflict. Your body might be picking up on that as a situation of you not being safe, which then launches your fight or flight response. Social exclusion, not being invited to your friend's party, not being, spoken to in a way that makes you feel like you're part of a conversation. The thought of falling ill or getting injured. So this is not that you have actually fallen ill or that you are injured. It's just the thought. And I use this example in the context of driving a car. So some people love speeding because it makes them feel that adrenaline rush. It makes them feel excited and vibey. Other people, the thought of driving or driving fast makes them feel absolutely unsafe, and they start sweating and they think that, something terrible is going to happen. It's the exact same external event, someone in a car driving fast, but the way that someone relates to that is where it changes. So to my point of how are you relating to your stressors, how you're relating is what is changing everything. For someone who relates to it in a way that this is dangerous and this is not safe, maybe they're thinking about getting injured or injuring other people on the road, and that makes them feel really threatened. So driving fast in a car is absolutely not fun for them. Other things that might be making you feel unsafe: getting stuck in traffic, especially if you're running late and you have to catch a flight, or you have a meeting, or you have to drop your child off somewhere, and now you're stuck in traffic, and oh my God, you're just not going to make it there on time. People are angry at you, you're angry at yourself. That might make you feel unsafe. Your body is picking up on this cue, and then your fight or flight response is being launched. Deadlines, not being heard. Not being heard is a very interesting one. It kind of operates at a deeper level, at a more subconscious level. And by that, I mean, you might be trying to talk to someone, make your point of view be understood and heard, and it is just not being received. And when that happens, you are now picking up on this cue that you're not safe and that you might be threatened. And then what happens is that your nervous system launches your fight or flight response. So gently think about what makes you feel unsafe. This is the second big takeaway that I want you all to ask yourself. Once again, not from a perspective of judgment at all. Remember, this is the way your body has kept itself alive for hundreds of thousands of years. Our ability to survey our environment and figure out what is safe, what is unsafe, what is threatening me, what is not threatening me. Our ability to do that is the precise thing that has preserved our species and helped us to stay alive. But sometimes the issue might be that we are still picking up on so-called danger cues when we are not in true danger. So how safe do I feel is an important question to ask yourself if you find that you are in and out of anxious or stress states throughout your day, when it might be that you are not truly in danger or truly being threatened. So gently asking yourself, how safe do I feel when you're having a stress response, is a very important skill, because it helps you to then note what your stressors are, what is triggering you, how unsafe that's making you feel, and thereby how real or unreal that threat is. And it's an important piece of information in the building of your self-awareness and in the understanding of who you are as a person. So the reason I call this talk stress management, anxiety management beyond meds or without meds, is because my first two takeaways already, as you can see, are not relying on psych medication, are not relying on a therapist or a counselor. They are relying on you yourself. These are skills to develop from within yourself, which you absolutely can. And when you start developing these skills, you start navigating and seeing your life through a different lens of awareness and understanding, and that empowers you, that gives you mastery, and that gives you resilience. Okay, so moving on. This is why I take a bottom-up approach. I work first with your psychophysiology, because anxiety and stress resides in the mind-body. As I mentioned, your stress response is not logical, it's not rational. Because if you were rationalizing your environment, if you were being logical about everything, your fight or flight response would not activate. That response is involuntary, and we need it to be involuntary. Because, for example, in today's world, say something happens in your apartment or your house and something catches on fire. At that point, you have immediately surveyed your environment and realized, I am not safe, there's something threatening. Your fight or flight response is activated. This is absolutely necessary because you need to mobilize, you need to do things to get yourself safe, you need to get out of there. You need to maybe call the ambulance or the fire department. So sometimes your fight or flight response is absolutely 100% needed. Sometimes it is not absolutely 100% needed. There is a stress response that is in your psychophysiology. And having self-awareness around that and understanding how safe or unsafe you are helps you to evaluate the true threat in that situation. And if you are able to do it in that situation itself, that starts creating an actual embodied self-awareness. So when you're under true threat, you will find that you're not doing these things. I'm not being necessarily self-aware and asking myself how safe I am, because at that point your body has just mobilized typically to get yourself safe. So these self-awareness skills and the ability to ask myself, am I safe, is when you notice you are stressed, but you're now kind of evaluating and trying to figure out how truly safe or unsafe am I? And you're doing it through the lens of what's happening in my mind or body. This is the bottom-up approach. What is happening in my mind or body? What has changed? What are my symptoms? So what is this bottom-up approach? I really like this piece of art. It's not mine. It's by this wonderful artist called Autumn Sky Art, who I follow on Instagram. I like this image of hers because it helps to kind of think about what this bottom-up approach is. So it's called bottom-up because it works with your body upwards in a sense. So if at the center of your being is yourself, your calm, regulated, stable self, sort of this orange circle, how do we get to that calm, regulated, stable self? If we do it through your body, because as you've now come to understand, the stress response, the anxiety response is bodily. So if I work through your body, or if you work through your body to bring yourself safety by understanding your stress responses and then doing certain other things that I will be talking about, then you arrive at a sense of stability and self-regulation, as opposed to what's called a top-down approach. So top-down is something that sort of starts with your mind and your cognition and gets you to that state of stability at your center. Top-down approaches are typically what you might do with a psychotherapist, with a counselor, when you do talk-based things, when you are speaking and engaging and trying to change cognition and cognitive patterns. That approach is something I also do with my clients, but it's usually secondary or it's interweaved into this bottom-up approach. Because if your body doesn't know how to feel safe, if it doesn't know how to access safety, no amount of cognitive reframing and working with your thoughts will help as deeply as when you are pairing it with the ability for your body to be safe as well. So bottom-up approach is knowing how to bring safety to your body to counter your stress responses. It is working with your psychophysiology. It is not just only sitting in a room with someone and talking. There is great benefit to that, but I have found as a practitioner that the benefit takes you only so far because you have not learned how to bring safety to your body. The thoughts and the reframing of your thoughts will only stick that deep because it'll come up against the wall of unsafety in your body. It will come up against your stress responses. So it is very critical to also work with your psychophysiology, your mind body, when you are trying to manage stress and anxiety beyond meds. And that is why I have this bottom-up approach. So those of you who may, work with me thereafter or who have worked with me, we work a lot with your psychophysiology and your mind body, knowing how to bring safety, knowing how to counter your stress responses, building a gentle self-awareness and understanding how safe it is you feel. Because without any of that, a true ability to self-regulate and achieve mastery and resilience is much, much harder. So that's why I do this bottom-up approach first. So countering stress responses is sort of the second part of my talk today. And it pairs very much with the bottom-up approach, because the bottom-up approach is working through your body, working through your physiology, trying to bring safety to your body. And the way in which you do that is by countering your stress responses after you have developed self-awareness. Why is that? Because if you are not self-aware, then you won't even know that you need to counter what's going on. It is your self-awareness that gives you the very ability to know that this is something you need to counter. So that's why I start with saying the first takeaway is building a gentle self-awareness. That gives you the ability to know what you need to do, to know if you want to counter your stress response or not. From there, having the self-awareness, you then understand what's changing in my psychophysiology. How is my stress response in my body? And how do I then want to counter it? How can I then counter it? So I really like this model. And if for those of you who are here listening live or taking notes or listening to this recording at a future point, spend some time with this slide. These are the 6 self-stressing targets from the work of Jonathan C. Smith. And I'm going to invite you to think about these through the lens of where does my stress response appear? And as you do that, I'm just going to take a quick drink of water. Look through all these 6 categories: posture and position, muscles, breathing, body focus, and I'll talk about what that is, emotion, and attention. So in all the years of work that I've done with my mentor and all the years of work that he has done, we have really established that your stress response is falling in one or all of these categories: in posture and position, in muscles, in breathing, in body focus, which I'll elaborate on, in emotion, and in attention. And this is a very useful way of now starting to understand who you are as a person and how you're navigating your stresses. Because these are the places in which your stress or your anxiety response falls. So I will be spending more time on posture, position, muscles, breathing, and emotion, attention in the future slides. Body focus, though, is the one that I want to talk about right now, because it's a very subjective lens and category. Body focus, a stressed body focus response can look different from one individual to the next to the third. So this is the way to think about body focus. A stressed body focus response is where your stress response goes and falls in your body, where there might be a little bit of a chink in your armor, where there might be a little bit of a predisposed tendency to fall sick or feel weak or not as strong. So what do I mean by that? For example, people who might have digestive issues or have a history of migraines or history of restlessness and stress, when you are stressed, you now find that your body is responding. You're getting a lot of stomach pains. You have the urge to use the bathroom. You're now getting migraines coming on very quickly. You might be experiencing insomnia. For some people, it might be those palpitations and that chest pain that comes in. Those are all stressed body focused responses, because now your stress response is going and landing in a very tangible physical symptom in your body. And it kind of, the pattern that I've observed is that it kind of falls in the place where you might be feeling there's a chink in your armor. Your body is not quite as strong there. That's where your stress response goes and falls. So I've worked with many clients who go to the hospital with a panic attack, thinking they are dying, but not knowing it's a panic attack. That's the diagnosis that they receive afterwards. But what happens? What has driven them to go to the hospital? They can't breathe, their chest is paining, things are breaking down in their body, they're not sure what's going on, they rush themselves to hospital. All sorts of labs are done on them, all sorts of tests are done on them, and nothing is found to be wrong. And then the diagnosis that they get from their doctor is that it's just stress and anxiety. You were probably having a panic attack. I've worked with so many people who've had this sort of response. And to kind of get that answer from a doctor when you think you're dying or you're about to die, it can be very disempowering. It can feel like you're being invalidated, because why is my body acting like this? Why did it make me feel like I was going to die and it was just a stress response or an anxiety attack? So I want to remind you that those stress responses, remember, it is your nervous system launching into a survival mode to keep you alive. And sometimes that might very much feel like you're dying, because your body is trying to keep you alive and it is activating all these physical processes in your body. So that is a stressed body focus. The balance 5 categories I'm going to dive into now. I have some research that I've paired with this stuff. For those of you who are on the call today and listening in, if you're interested in research, just type in yes into the chat box, and I'll spend a little bit more time on the research slides, because if you're not interested, I will skip those by, because I know that not everyone is too interested in the evidence and the science and so on. So if possible, just pop into the chat yes if you're interested in the research, and if not, I will probably go through the research slides at a faster pace. Okay, so we're going to dive now into these self-stressing targets on an individual level. And before I dive into it, I want to remind you that wherever it is your stress response appears, there's also a way to counter it through your nervous system. Okay, so I will spend some time on the research slides. So remember, this is sort of the third step in our journey today. First is gentle self-awareness. Second is understanding safety cues and realizing that that is my nervous system's response. Third is wherever your stress response appears, and it was these 6 categories, as I mentioned, these ones, wherever it is your stress response is appearing, it might be one of these categories, it might be all of these categories. There is a way to counter that stress response through your nervous system. And that's what I'm going to talk about for the rest of this presentation. So let's begin before that with this mind-body connection and how it helps me to be healthy. So this pairs into the bottom-up approach that I talked about. This pairs into stress responses and countering stress responses. So how can mind-body medicine help me to be healthy? When our mind is stressed, our bodies react. This much you have now understood well from everything I've said. Sometimes this can be in the form of an increased heart rate, sweaty palms, or tight muscles. As I mentioned, those are where your stress response often tends to fall. Now, if you have a way by which to regulate these physical responses, your mind receives the feedback from your changed physical reaction. So what does that mean? Say you're simply just running late and you're stuck in traffic, and now your stress response is launched. Your breathing is out of whack and your muscles are completely stressed. At this point, you have self-awareness because you've been practicing that skill, and you are now understanding your life in terms of, am I safe or am I not safe? And you've realized, A, I'm having a stress response, and B, I'm actually safe, nothing is wrong. It's just that I'm running late. C, you have now noticed that your muscles are tight and you're not breathing well. So you now start changing that response. You start relaxing your muscles and you start regulating your breath. What happens to your mind? Your mind gets the feedback from your changed physical reaction that you are safe, that you can now step into calm. So our mind begins to calm down because the mind-body connection works in both ways. We can calm our mind down in order to relax our body, and we can learn how to relax our body, which will help our mind to calm down. This is what I mean by countering the stress response, learning how to regulate your nervous system through your body, which will help your mind to calm down. This is a very powerful skill. And as I mentioned, because it works through your body, it will work in a very important and magical way because it is bringing safety to your body. This is a body that is struggling to access safety and to understand what safety is. But when you learn how to relax the body and to regulate the body, you are giving it the one thing that it is trying to seek, which is safety. Okay, moving on. Okay. So the first category, emphasis on posture and position. When you feel stressed or low, you might find that you are adopting a defensive or aggressive posture. And over time, you might find your joints hurt, your muscles hurt, your energy is decreasing. So with each and every one of these categories, I want to remind you that, remember, these are involuntary reflexes. So you might not have awareness that this is what's going on in your body. It's happening at a very subconscious level that your body just launches into. But when you start developing self-awareness and understanding of your own mind-body, you're able to gently assess these categories. So it's not that when you feel stressed or low, you are noticing necessarily that your posture has changed, but I'm going to invite you now into noticing whether your posture has changed or not. And it can be very subtle. It could be the littlest thing. Someone is yelling at you and you're having an argument, and your shoulders start contracting and your spine slouches a bit. The feedback to your mind at that point is that you're not safe. But if you start building awareness around this, you start noticing my posture has changed. And so you start finding ways in which to help your nervous system to regulate through your posture. So these are 3 techniques that one can learn. Yoga is something I do teach. The latter 2, I'm not trained in. But the Alexander technique and Feldenkrais are also ways in which to work with your posture and position to help your nervous system to regulate when you find that your stress response falls in the category of postures and position. And so here's my research slide. There is some research that talks about how standing tall and standing wide, these body positions absolutely have an effect on how people feel. And so initially, when this sort of thing was being investigated by scientists, they also started finding that hormone levels change. However, those studies it's been hard to replicate those studies. That's why I didn't include it here. But the other side of that is that never mind hormonal levels, because those things can sometimes be hard to replicate. They're very situation based. But what posture and position does affect is that people start feeling better and start feeling more confident. And that's a very important thing, because really your entire experience of being a human is how you feel as a human. You're not really looking at, oh, my cortisol has increased right now, my adrenaline has gone up. All of those things happen and we don't even realize. What we do realize is how we feel. And what science and research is saying is that when you stand tall and you stand wide, people start feeling better and more confident. So just through your posture, you can feedback through your mind a way in which to self-regulate and feel safe and feel more confident and start building the mastery and the resilience that I spoke about. Next category, emphasis on muscles. Once again, the muscle tension response I find is very covert. It's very subconscious. Oftentimes when you're stressed or low, you might feel ready for attack by clenching, gripping, and tightening your muscles. And you might be doing all of this without really realizing that you're doing that at all. And over time, you might find that you have chronically tight muscles, you have pain, you have fatigue, your shoulder hurts all the time, your jaws hurt all the time. You know, it's a very interesting thing that I've come across with all my clients in Singapore. Whoever I ask the question to, are you grinding your teeth at night? Every single one of them has said yes to me. And to me, that is almost like mind-blowing. And it might be that I work a lot with mental health and with mind-body, and that's why everyone I see is grinding their teeth at night. But what does that mean from this bottom-up perspective and from a stress response perspective? To me, what that means is that there's a lot of tension being held in your jaw muscles. There's this unconscious, subconscious gripping and processing that's happening, and especially at night, when the body feels like it has a chance now to disseminate some of those stress energies. And so it's very important to start building this gentle self-awareness around where am I holding and carrying and gripping tension in my body, because as you start developing awareness around that, you can start releasing it as well. And a skill I teach around this, in which I help my clients to practice over time in session and out of session, is something called progressive muscle relaxation. And it's a tool I absolutely love so much. You know, its value is very underrepresented, I think, but progressive muscle relaxation really helps you to start understanding your body and knowing how to relax it in a way that then feeds back to your mind that you are safe. So my research slide on this, PMR, progressive muscle relaxation, was used amongst a group of aggressive elementary students. So all of this mind-body work is very helpful for children as well. For those of you who have children or work with children or know children who might benefit from such support, mind-body techniques, because it works through the body rather than trying to change cognitive patterns, is a very effective way of helping young people to also regulate and have control and mastery over their stress responses. And interestingly, there is some research around that. So what people found, what the scientists who did the study found, is that when they taught aggressive elementary students PMR, they found that it was a proactive short-term way to reduce aggression. And post-test, follow-up levels remain below those at pre-test. Another doctor called Dr. John Sarno, who used to work at the NYU School of Medicine, developed a mind-body approach, a psychophysiological approach for chronic back pain, which is one of the most common conditions in the States, and which he says is very much related to your mind. So it's a psychosomatic kind of condition. What he found was that when you start treating chronic back pain with psychophysiological symptom relief therapy, 64% of his research volunteers reported being 100% pain-free 6 months later. Now, this is mind-blowing. This is a chronic back pain situation that is then treated through psychophysiological symptom relief. And it then had 100% efficacy rate, which is just fascinating. It's your mind-body connection is that powerful, which is that when you can work through your body and bring yourself safety and self-regulation, symptoms start changing. Chronic symptoms can start changing. Breathing. So breathing is a very self-explanatory sort of stress response. When you feel stressed or low, you might change the way you breathe. You might be developing chronic hyperventilation. You might be yawning a lot. And then ways in which to counter that stress response through your nervous system are things like paced breathing, diaphragmatic breathing, breath retention techniques. These are all things I go in depth into with my clients. I really teach and empower them to understand themselves, their own relationship with their breath, and how to practice that in a very foundational and fundamental way. Because the breath is something you are doing all the time. Breathing is something you're doing all the time. Your breath is always with you. If you can learn how to regulate through your breath, it is a very powerful tool, and it's coming from within yourself. And with this powerful mind-body connection, diaphragmatic breathing not just has, efficacy on a stress response, it can change things like hypertension, your blood pressure. It can improve the ability to be attentive and to change negative effects of stress in your body. And this is what I really love about the mind-body approach that I take and that I teach, because when you start learning self-regulation to master and manage your stress and anxiety, you start benefiting all of your life, not just, mental health, but these physiological things as well, things like chronic back pain, things like hypertension. When you start practicing these skills, so much of your health starts changing, which makes it a very, very powerful and important tool to practice. So emphasis on emotion. Emotion and attention, the last two categories, are in the psychological realm. They're less physiological. And how I want to invite you to think about these categories is, when you feel stressed or low, do you find that you have repetitive negative thoughts or images in your mind? Do you find that can then lead to kind of prolonged and exacerbated emotional responses like aggression, like sadness, like depression? And do you find that such emotional responses fatigue you? If you can relate to this, it might be that you have one of your stress responses is a stressed emotion response. Sometimes I work with clients who have claustrophobia or certain phobias, for example, and I oftentimes find that a stressed emotional response is the way that their stress is manifesting, because they imagine the walls are closing in on them. They imagine that bad things are going to happen. People who have a fear of flying, same thing often happens. They think that the plane is going to crash. They are having negative self-talk around all of that. And then that can lead to these exacerbated emotional responses. But once again, there are ways in which to retrain your nervous system to counter the stress response when you are aware that this is what's going on. Some of those practices are positive imagery and self-talk, heart-centered meditations, something called loving kindness or metta. Once again, these are all skills that I teach my clients, that I help them to engage with, to practice, to understand what it means for their own selves. And then once they understand what it means for their own selves and how they can practice it, it becomes a tool by which they can retrain their nervous system when they are having such a stress response. So I really loved the study that I found. Self-compassion as a predictor of interleukin-6 response to acute psychosocial stress. So interleukin-6, IL-6, is a inflammatory marker. It's something that scientists believe and have observed gets released in your body when you're going through stressors. So it can be a psychosocial stress, it could be actual stress like a physical illness, but whatever the case, IL-6 starts circulating in your body when you are going through stress. And now what these scientists studied was, what does the ability to have self-compassion do to that IL-6 response? And what they found is that self-compassion, participants who were higher in self-compassion exhibited significantly lower day one IL-6 responses. Isn't that fascinating? I mean, if there is a mind-body connection, I find that the study like really illuminates it, because here is something intangible. Here is a quality called self-compassion, which is having an absolute physical response in your body, which is that when you have more self-compassion for yourself, and what that means is you look at yourself with kindness and without judgment, when you then go through a stressful response, your body's creation of stress hormones or stress molecules like IL-6 is actually less. And so if this sort of thing interests you, drop me an email, we can talk through this more. If you want to understand how can I build self-compassion in myself, how can I practice this more, how can I create these masterful ways of reducing my actual physical self-stressing reaction, drop me an email afterwards and we can dive into ways in which you can do that for yourself. Okay, the last category, emphasis on attention, is again a psychological response. So I want you to think about attention through the lens of, what is your focus doing? Where does your focus go when you are stressed? And this is a spectrum, because focus, when it's on one end of the spectrum, is sort of a dysregulated response. When it's on the other end of the spectrum, it is also a dysregulated response. And because it's a spectrum, those two things look completely different, but they are still a stress response in the area of attention. So at one end of the spectrum, you might find your mind goes completely blank. Your focus is such that you are completely unfocused. That's oftentimes called a dissociative state as well, which is that when your body has now launched this fight or flight response, your body is so stressed, the nervous system is so activated that the way in which your body tries to access safety is for everything to go offline. It's for you to completely disengage from your environment and for your mind to go blank and for you to not have a connection with what is happening in your environment. The counter to that is mindfulness practice. And when I was in med school and a student and studying mind body, I used to often think, well, dissociation almost sounds like you're meditating because everything has gone blank and you've gone offline. So what's the difference? The difference is this. Dissociation is involuntary. You have not chosen to feel that way when you're stressed, and yet it is happening to you. And that can be another stressor stacked on top of your initial stress response. Because without your involvement, without your choice in this matter, your body and your mind has gone offline and blank. And that can be very stressful and very scary. On the other hand, when you're practicing mindfulness, you are actively engaging with your mind being still and your mind being centered. That is your choice, and that is empowering. And that's the difference between a stress response versus engaging with rest and relax responses. In the former, it's involuntary and you often don't have a choice and you feel like you're losing control. In the latter, as you start countering this through your body and through your mind, you have control. You have the ability to practice it, to then develop mastery and resilience. And so going back to attention, on the one hand, your mind might go blank. On the other hand, you might feel hyperactive with too many thoughts. That's sometimes called hypervigilance. It might manifest in people who have a sort of perfectionism attitude, meaning if I'm stressed out, if I try to do every single thing, if I try to check every single box and think all these thoughts, then I feel like I'm in control of my situation. But I want you to go back to thinking about how are you relating to your stress. For people who are hypervigilant and hyperactive and having too many thoughts, the way that they're relating to their stress is from this perspective, oftentimes, of trying to over control it. And that, again, is another stressor that might be stacking on top of their initial stressor. And so if your response to stress is in this way, that your focus is changing in this way, it might be that one of your stress responses is an emphasis on attention. And the way in which to counter that is through mindfulness practices. And so the research slides on that are quite interesting. So does mindfulness actually improve cognition? In the early phases of mindfulness training, which are concerned with development of focused attention. So if you work with me as a client hereafter and we practice mindfulness, the first step that I do with you is to develop focused attention. What researchers have found is that when you start developing this focused attention, which is in that early phase of mindfulness training, there can then be significant improvements in selective and executive attention. The ability to be attentive in a way that is functional and high performing. Then, in the following phases of mindfulness training, which are characterized by an open monitoring of internal and external stimuli, it's sort of that development of self-awareness, which once again I work on with my clients. When you start developing that, you find researchers have found that you improve your sustained attention abilities, your ability to sustain attention to something, which then improves cognition, which improves working memory capacity and executive functions. So when you start practicing and learning mindfulness, your cognition starts developing in these amazing ways. And that's why when I say stresses and anxiety are part of life, but you can develop mastery over them, this is part of what I mean. When you learn how to counter stress responses and practice those ways of countering stress responses, you start developing mastery. Okay. And so for those of you who are interested in research, there's some neuroscience behind this as well. Neuroimaging studies have started to uncover which parts of the brain are actually activating when you practice mindfulness. So they found that the one part of the brain called the anterior cingulate cortex is associated with enhancing attention. They found that another part called the frontal limbic network is associated with improving emotional regulation and reducing stress. And all of this is happening because you are simply practicing mindfulness. I'm going to invite everyone to mute themselves, please. I think someone is unmuted, so if you can go ahead and mute yourself, please.
Yes.
All right. I think I've muted everyone now. So this is the third big takeaway to all of you, countering your stress response. So if you remember, first takeaway is building gentle self-awareness. Second takeaway is countering your stress response. Second takeaway is understanding if you're safe. And the third takeaway is countering your stress response. And you can do this by understanding where your stress response is falling. And then knowing how to counter that stress response through the ways in which I shared just now. And of course, if these are skills you would like to develop for yourself, then please reach out to me as well, because these are ways in which I empower all my clients to learn these responses and to then practice them in their lives in a way that's effective. So why does any of this matter? I'm just going to quickly, go through the next few slides, because we know why this matters. You have all turned up today. You're listening to this talk because you know it matters to manage your stress response. So that is one side of it. Through this lens of research is another angle through which I want to invite you to think about how this matters. Why does the mind-body connection matter? Why does managing my stress and self-regulating matter at all? So there's this study, a very interesting study called the Relaxation Response and Resiliency Training Study, which discovered that mind-body interventions have the potential to substantially reduce healthcare utilization at relatively low cost. So what does it mean to substantially reduce healthcare utilization? That means the amount of times that you go to the doctor and get things done for yourself reduces when you are using mind-body interventions. And it happens at a relatively low cost because it's just the initial investment cost to learn the skill. Thereafter, you practice it on your own. And you're not relying on anything outside of yourself. You're simply relying on your own ability to regulate, which comes at a very low cost. And in fact, it comes at such a huge benefit because it is self-sustained, it is really empowering and masterful. So I want to share a few more interesting anecdotes from the research study, where in 2015, they published the study retrospectively. The study looked at how much healthcare services were being utilized in a population of about 4,500 individuals against a control of about 13,000 individuals in a major US health network for about 4 years. And what was the intervention? What was it that the 4,500 individuals were getting? What they got was receiving a particular type of mind-body training versus the 13,000 who received no mind-body training. And then what the researchers observed for were changes in utilization of healthcare services. And what happened? At 1 year, total utilization decreased by 43%. Clinical encounters decreased by 41.9%. Imaging, so getting X-rays, CT scans, etc., all of that ultrasounds, all of that decreased by about 50%. Lab encounters, getting blood work done, getting further testing done, that increased by 43.5%. And procedures decreased by 21.4%. And what did these people do? To remind you, they learned mind-body techniques, which they then practiced. And after 1 year, their usage of healthcare services decreased by about half, which is just fascinating. I think this is a fascinating and powerful piece of information for all of us to really think about. Because not just are you saving on, not just are you learning how to manage your stress and anxiety, you are saving on healthcare utilization. You are saving on lost productivity and lost hours. So what was the intervention that they used? Interestingly, in Massachusetts General Hospital, which is a very big and large hospital in Boston, there's an institute called the Benson Henry Institute for Mind-Body Medicine, which teaches their patients a relaxation response resiliency program, 3RP. And I want you all to focus on this word resiliency, because what they teach is a relaxation response through various techniques. But what that does is it creates resiliency. And what is resiliency? Resiliency is not just the ability to recover and to get through adverse situations. It is the ability to thrive through stress. And that, my friends, for all of you who are listening in and who might be listening to this talk later, the ability to thrive through stress is a next level super skill. But it is a skill that you can learn and teach yourself. It is the next stage that happens when you start managing your stress and anxiety and you start practicing the things you have learned, And practitioners of mind-body medicine, myself included, I can attest to this. And I don't only have to attest to this, research such as what I've shared with you just now attests to this. You start needing to use the hospital less. Your body starts responding. You start being able to thrive through stress, not just cope through it. And so I wanted to ask you all, resilience and mastery, if you could learn how to self-regulate, would you? Because this is not just for those of us who have stress and anxiety. This is for all of us who want to learn resilience and mastery. If you can give yourself these skills, would you do that for yourself? I mean, for me, the question is, would you not? Would you not want to teach your family, have your children learn this, have your spouse learn this, in addition to yourself? And so, I only have an hour here today. I have tried to give you all as many takeaways as I can. But as I mentioned, learning resilience and mastery and managing your stressors is both a practice and a journey. And that's why at Balanced Living, I have created this mind-body medicine program, which I've called Anxiety Management Beyond Meds, because I have to give it a name. But really speaking, what it is this one-on-one program in which I guide you to learn and to develop these skills that I've spoken about today. And this can be life-changing for you, because it's not just mastering and managing anxiety, it is mastering and managing all of your life and then building resiliency so that at a stage of practice in the future, you start thriving through stress, not just coping with it. And I wanted to thereby, talk a little bit more about what you get if you sign up to this program. What you get is lifetime access to all resources, including recordings, worksheets, the emails that I send you, the files that I share with you. You will have unlimited email support with me between sessions, and you get a personalized email summary with me after each session that captures everything we spoke about and what we're working on together. What I found in Singapore is that a lot of practitioners, whether they're naturopaths or therapists or so on, they don't actually do that. They don't send you a personalized summary after each session. But this is something I absolutely do, because I think that summary becomes a resource that you can go back to and refer to, and reminds you of what we've spoken about, which then becomes a sort of manifesto that you carry with you. And then in each session, I go through exactly what you need to know for that week. I walk through specific actions that you might need to take. You can ask me clarifying questions in the session and between sessions, and I help you to troubleshoot all of that. And I want to remind you that because mind-body approaches and stress and anxiety is very unique, the way in which I've created this program is that we are co-creators of your journey. And the program then becomes tailored to suit your unique needs. So I showed you these kind of 6 self-stressing targets. The way that those targets show up in your life will be very different. Thereby, the way in which I help to teach you to counter those responses will also be very different. And thereby, I tailor the program to suit your unique needs and help you to learn these practices in a way that really makes sense for you. And so skills and tools that you learn, what you've gotten today is a foundation. If you would like to develop this and really help it to make a change in your life in a very significant way, or if you know anyone to whom what I've spoken about today would make a lot of sense and would change their life, these are the skills and tools that you will learn. You will dive more into understanding what safety and threat is. You will start to really understand and know what triggers you uniquely, how you uniquely react in the face of your anxiety. What are your psychophysiological symptoms? I help you to develop gentle self-awareness, because to be honest, the ability to develop that gentle self-awareness, yes, you can do it on your own, but when you do it with a practitioner is when you really hone in on that skill. And with a skilled mind-body practitioner helping you to develop gentle self-awareness, that starts creating the foundation into which all of this work then falls. Then I'll teach you specific modalities. Every week you learn a new modality, we'll practice it in session. You'll understand how to begin countering your responses. You'll understand your innate emotional nature, which comes back to understanding who you are as a person and building on that self-awareness. And I have 2 lines here that I've bolded. I've bolded them because I haven't talked about these 2 things today, but these are things that I work on with my clients when they sign up with me. Being supported in changing self-limiting narratives and having a philosophy or philosophies by which to live. And these are sort of higher level skills. Once you start learning self-awareness, mastering the counter responses, learning the toolbox of skills and practices, being supported to change your self-limiting narratives and having a philosophy or philosophies by which to live brings all of it together. That then makes this practice become embodied. It gives you a landscape in which you can navigate and live through your life in a very different and high functional and masterful way. So in summary, if you work with me through this program, the previous slide is everything that you will get. And this slide is everything that you will learn, that I will empower you to learn. And I'm very keen on helping all of this to be created in a self-sustained way, so that it's coming from within, so that you're not relying on psych medication, you're not relying on a counselor or a therapist. You will learn what you need to learn in order to be able to live and move through life with resilience and mastery. So, as I said, all of this involves practice, but if you would like to work with me, you will be absolutely guided one-on-one in all of this. So reflect on all of that. Think about any questions that you might have. You can turn on your video if you like at this point, or you can keep it off. If you want to speak out the question, please feel free. If you want to put it into the chat box, you can also feel free to do that. We've covered a lot of very interesting concepts today. And I want to invite you to ask away if you have any questions. But because this is kind of an interesting topic, if you would rather email me, here's my email. You can feel free to send me an email. And if you would like to follow me on social media, this is my Instagram profile. It's dr.purna Menon. And I post a lot of mind-body tips on there, a lot of naturopathic tips. If you want to kind of, just passively be learning and picking up on skills, please feel free to follow me on my Instagram as well, or message me there. So I will open the floor up now to any questions that anyone might have related to this, related to your unique experience of stress or anxiety. And you can stick it into the chat box, or you can unmute and ask away.